Nate, give me for body composition purposes, just a 30,000-foot view of what a diet might look like, and then we'll pick that apart here in just a bit. So I'm kind of setting you up to fidget some. Welcome to Paleo FX, Nate.
So for me, it's looking at it, I mean, I know we're talking about workout nutrition, but it's looking at it more from a big picture perspective first, in that when it comes to, and there's even differences with body composition, whether you're trying to get huge or trying to get really lean and ripped and all that stuff. So for me, I always look at kind of the numbers first as being the most important, and hitting your numbers for the day, being kind of 80% of the game before we even get into kind of like this peri-workout nutrition stuff we're going to talk about first. So kind of optimizing calorie intake, protein intake, and then there's a huge variability that I've seen with people following carb-based diets or low-carb diets or whatever, and that's just been my experience with pure body composition people, is that it's all over the map. So I'd love to tell you I have the special formula for you, but I think it's highly variable, and we were talking about that yesterday in the other panel too. So to me, when we look at the big picture of body composition transformation, it's about your diet for the day or even the week. That matters infinitely more than any peri-workout nutrition stuff.
Sure. I love how you hold the mic like a rapper too. That's
I used to be in a band, so you gave me this mic and I almost started singing some 80s tunes, dude.
Ken, what kind of transition have you seen in the NBA? I mean, this is really, really cool. I wanted to bring it up early, but it's very interesting that this paleo writ large diet ideas is coming to the NBA. What have you seen with the teams?
It is. I cover the NBA for CBSSports.com, and I did a series of stories in December about nutrition in the NBA. And there was an interesting comment yesterday. Someone in another one of the discussions made the point that we're in an environment like this, we're kind of preaching to the choir a little bit. We're kind of like-minded people with similar beliefs, and we're just exchanging the same ideas. It's kind of an echo chamber. But I think, number one, remember there's a camera in every room. So we're projecting beyond the choir here. There's people on the outside who might be curious about what we're doing, and they're learning about it. And I think you guys should all feel good about the fact that you're making an impact to the world at large. And in the sports world, in my little corner of the world, I've seen that. Just by virtue of the fact that I've been following a paleo-type diet for 4 or 5 years, I'm interested in it. I talk to players about what they do. I'm interested in how they, professional athletes nourish themselves, and learn that Blake Griffin is doing a paleo-type diet. Ray Allen of the Miami Heat is doing one. They all do varying degrees of carb cycling that we talked about over the last couple of days, because they are professional athletes and some of them feel they need that more than others. But it's becoming, I used to walk into an NBA locker room and see players sitting around with their, French fries and cheeseburgers and pizzas and stuff from the concession stands. The people that are really hurting are the ball boys who used to get tips for going up to the concession stands to get food for these guys. That is run dry. These guys are paying attention to what they're eating now. And you don't see junk food in the locker room as much as you used to. Does that mean everybody buys into it? No, there's still high-level athletes who make millions of dollars playing sports, and their body depends on it. And they still think they can out-train a bad diet. And I don't think you can, and I think some athletes learn the hard way.
Kiefer, we kind of touched on this last year, talking about the diet of the LA Lakers in specific, but how would you see, just take a base paleo diet, let's just assume it's a base paleo diet for an NBA team, how would you tweak that to make it better?
Of course, I'm going to say they should probably hold off all their carbohydrates to the evening, but depending on it doesn't matter when they're eating those carbohydrates, they should eat them at night. And it doesn't even matter what kind. But, looking at the duration of their performance is kind of important for a basketball player. They could probably go most of the game with the internal energy stores that they could recoup prior to the game. So, in those instances, I would say they should be consuming water the whole time. And then again, have their carbs after that event. Leading up to that event, they would, load their carbs appropriately and still train in a low insulin state so that they could store as much of that energy as possible that they need for the game. If they started to gas out a little bit, which they would probably know from practice, then you would start to introduce possibly some carbohydrates or a carbohydrate MCT mix during the game to help sustain their energy levels.
So this is a really good example of the difference between carb backloading and carb night. These guys are obviously practicing most days that they're not actually playing games, so that's a totally different look than somebody who's training twice a week and doing nothing else in between.
Right. Yeah. You could try to force these guys to go low carb for a long period of time, but I'm not sure they would go through the effort to make it pay off in the end.
Ben, perfect time for you to jump in. So you've championed a version of a ketogenic diet for endurance athletics. Can you kind of speak to how that might work better than a base paleo diet for an NBA player, for example?
Well, I'm not necessarily convinced that ketosis is going to be the best choice in that scenario. And we talked about this in the ketosis panel last night about how it's a useful endurance biohack, or perhaps a good thing for someone who wants to tap into some of the mental performance benefits of ketosis to use. But it can be very, very difficult to pull off in a typical scenario, especially for like an anaerobic strength, speed, power athlete, just because you have to spend a very, very long amount of time on that diet to get the mitochondrial biogenesis necessary for you to be able to churn as many fatty acids as possible through that cycle to rapidly generate ATP. You have to be willing to throw a lot of things into the mix, from medium chain triglycerides to amino acids to ATP precursors to allow you to actually get a lot of energy in the absence of carbohydrates. You have to be really careful when you walk into an Italian restaurant. So I mean, like there's all sorts of things you got to do that I think might make it logistically a little bit difficult for a player like that to use. But I mean, like, for me, a big part of this, I think a lot of folks don't talk about enough, is that in an era where we can actually test players and test people, and you guys and girls can test yourselves. I mean, like, you know, it's going to vary from person to person. You're going to get people with dysregulated thyroid. You're going to get people who maybe test with high HDL and really high HSCRP and dysregulated white blood cells that might have gut issues. You're going to get people who have testosterone and cortisol imbalances. And I mean, in a case like that, it's going to be a different approach for each person. And I mean, if there's any population that can afford to actually get blood and salivary testing and gut testing, it's something like the NBA. So